The pandemic was a weird time for me, as I'm sure it was for all of us. One day I was sitting in a classroom, half listening to a lecture, and the next I was in my bedroom, staring at a screen, attending school in my pajamas. And somehow that shift changed everything. I went from structured days to all-nighters, from real classrooms to Google Classroom, and from walking between classes to barely leaving my chair. But oddly enough, some of the biggest changes weren't just happening in my schedule. They were happening inside me, on a level I couldn't even see. I wasn't the only one feeling this shift. Everyone I knew was going through it. School moved online, and my school had this new program going on at the time too. It was supposed to help with self-paced and project-based learning, but with the chaos of the sudden shift to remote classes, it didn't really work. It was less rigorous, but it was more frustrating, and somehow made it even harder to stay engaged. And then there was my sleep schedule, if you could even call it that. Late night gaming turned into all-night gaming. Discord calls that started as study sessions turned into hours of playing games until the sun came up. And since school was just a few steps away from my bed, waking up at the last minute was the norm. But here's the thing, those changes weren't just affecting my routine. They were affecting my body, my mind, and even my genes. Not by changing my DNA itself, but altering which parts of it were turned on or off. That's what epigenetics is all about. It's how your behaviors and environment can change how your genes are expressed, how much they're expressed, or if they're expressed at all. Think of your DNA as a massive instruction manual. Every cell in your body has the same manual, but not every cell uses every page. That's why we don't grow hair on our eyeballs, or have teeth on our knees. Epigenetics is like adding bookmarks, highlights, sticky notes in that manual to tell your body which instructions to follow and which ones to ignore. Before I go more into epigenetics, I think it's important to have a general understanding of DNA and what processes occur that make it as important as it is to us. One pretty broad way to see it is with what we call the central dogma of biology. Basically, it outlines a directional flow of information. It starts with the DNA, and then it goes into RNA, which in turn goes into protein. And those are what do stuff and carry out functions in our bodies. Two major processes to note are transcription and translation. Transcription happens first in this central dogma. It's where the DNA sequence is copied to make an RNA molecule, which is then later processed to make mRNA. Anyways, translation is what happens next. And that's when mRNA is decoded to specify a sequence of amino acids that will build the protein. Basically, we translate from an mRNA sequence to the language of proteins, which is amino acids. So that's our central dogma. DNA is transcribed into RNA, which is translated into protein. The protein is what results in the expressed gene that we consider the phenotype, the trait that we see. Alright, so that's a bit of an introduction into genetics, which sets up more discussion of epigenetics later. Now, I'm going to talk about a pretty interesting phenomenon that I noticed within my friend group, which happened during the pandemic. I mentioned in my last video that before lockdown, we were in a classroom, sitting next to each other for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And then I mentioned that once the pandemic started, it was actually more than that. So how did that happen? Basically, we hung out online. My friends and I all had a Discord server that we would spend time in. There were text channels where you could type messages, send pictures and videos and whatnot, and then there were voice channels where you could talk to each other. And when the lockdown started, no one had anything better to do, so we would just hang out in there all the time. And I noticed something really funny happen, where we all basically understood that if you wanted to talk to someone or do something, you would open up the Discord server and join a voice channel. More often than not, you would have a friend already waiting in there, ready to boot up a game or jump into a conversation. And everyone ended up subconsciously picking up regular shifts, where they just developed a habit of being in the voice channel at specific times of the day. We had the early morning crew, who sat in the voice channels during class, and I was part of this group. We were muted during class, but most of our classes would just be time to work on our projects with that new program my school had started. So we would give each other company while we worked on those projects, and it helped make online school just a bit more bearable. We then had the post-school hours group. They were either the ones that had slept through classes or just finished classes and were wrapping up their work. We'd work on our homework, and when we got done with that, we'd start gaming. And I'm talking Minecraft, Roblox, Fortnite, GTA, Terraria, Among Us, we did it all. As we were gaming, we transitioned into the late night crew. The ones who stayed up with little regard to sleep and just spent all this newfound free time enjoying the company of one another. It was these late night conversations while playing games or doing whatever else came to mind that I remember the most fondly. With everything else in the world seeming bleak and dreary, those moments were the escape we needed. For a little while, we forgot about our frustrations with online school, our uncertainty about the future, our fear of the virus, fear for our loved ones, and instead we got to enjoy one another's companionship and make some memories despite our circumstance. It was in those moments that I had the idea for this YouTube channel. It was when I learned about myself, what I believed in, what I wanted to do in life, and it was when I made some of my closest friendships that I still cherish to this day. Sure, it wasn't the best for my sleep schedule, but neither was online school the best for my education, nor was the state of the world any good for my mental health. The point is that it was our way of making the most out of a pretty tough hand to be dealt, especially at such a critical, formative age. We adapted to our situation the best we could, and I'm proud of our resilience. We'd created our own support group for one another, so when our worlds were reduced to a home and a computer screen, we knew that there were people on the other side, waiting for us to join a voice channel and hang out together. Let's talk a little bit about DNA methylation. Going back to the instruction manual analogy, imagine your DNA is a long, complex sentence. DNA methylation is like putting a little sticker over certain words. These stickers can be used to silence parts of the sentence so that they aren't read at all. These stickers are methyl groups, CH3. It's one carbon and 3 hydrogens bonded to it. To get a little specific, in mammals, DNA methylation involves the transfer of a methyl onto the C5 position of cytosine to form 5-methylcytosine. Cytosine being one of the 4 nucleotide bases found in DNA, the others being adenine, guanine, and thymine. Essentially, this DNA methylation regulates gene expression, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's actually pretty important for development and growth. It's an important epigenetic mechanism which changes the activity of a DNA sequence without actually changing the sequence itself. With the pandemic's chaotic effect on our world and our outlook, our bodies were under a lot of stress, and research suggests that stress, especially early life stress, can induce changes in DNA methylation, which will have long-term effects. Essentially, those circumstances affected us so much that we might be noticing the effects long after those situations have passed. After the first vaccine had developed and we had gotten it, my friends and I started a really special tradition. One night, we had stayed up so late that it was almost morning, the sun was about to rise, and one of us suggested that we go on a walk and see the sunrise together. So we put on our masks and we met outside my house, and we went on a socially distanced walk throughout our town. We actually ended up walking to our English teacher's house, and we attended English class from his porch. He was really surprised, and so were our classmates. After the class let out, we realized that we should have checked the forecast, because it had begun to rain, heavily. We all scattered and ran home in the rain, but I remember just beaming. I had the biggest smile across my face for the rest of the day. We'd started a new tradition, and it was wonderful. We'd go on early morning walks before class started while wearing masks and socially distancing. If our friends wanted to join us, they were welcome to, as long as they got vaccinated and followed the rules of wearing a mask and keeping their distance. And we kept this tradition up throughout the rest of high school, even after the pandemic had passed. Remember when I talked earlier about how special those late night conversations were? Well, these walks were just like that. I got to see parts of my town that I had never seen before. Learn things about my friends that they had never shared before. I think there's something really pure about being outside right when the sun is coming up, watching that sunrise and starting your day with a fun social activity. Doing that consistently with your friends really opens up those following hours to be something meaningful. We basically had live, verbal journal entries. We'd talk about what was concerning us, what we were looking forward to, what we hoped for the future, all while getting some exercise and bringing some stability to our sleep schedules. That's when I developed my love for dew droplets on grass in the morning. That's when I developed some confidence to try my hand at this whole college thing. My friends encouraged me, even if they didn't know. And I think those walks are one of the things I look back on really fondly. So I've talked a lot about DNA, but let's think a little bit more beyond just the DNA itself. More specifically, how is it even stored? It's this massive, incredibly thorough instruction manual that contains all the information we need to build ourselves and operate. It makes sense that it would be pretty large. If stretched out entirely, the DNA in a single human cell would be about 6 feet long. All the DNA in your entire body, and it would be enough to go to the sun and back over 60 times. Some people estimate that if we took all the DNA in all bacteria on Earth right now, it would stretch to the end of the universe and back 23 times. I think I've made my point. It then becomes pretty impressive that we're able to package that much information into something as small as a cell. And the way that we do that is with the help of histones. Histones are a type of protein that help condense those long strands of DNA into a more compact form. To do so, DNA actually wraps around these proteins, forming a complex called chromatin. Histones are highly basic. They contain a lot of basic amino acid residues. Remember that proteins are made up of amino acids. Lysine, arginine, and histidine are the basic ones. And this basically means that the histone has a lot of positively charged regions on it. And DNA is actually negatively charged, so this allows histones to better interact with DNA. The opposite charges attract each other. Anyways, modifications to these histones are another mechanism of epigenetics, and there's a lot of different kinds. The best studied ones are acetylation, methylation, phosphorylation, and ubiquitination. There are a lot of others. There's lactylation, citrullination, crotonylation, succinylation, sumoylation, propionylation, butyrylation, 2-hydroxybutyrylation, 2-hydroxyisobutyrylation. But let's talk about acetylation. Remember how I said DNA methylation is like putting a sticky note over the sentence of a DNA strand, making it harder to read one part of it? Well, acetylation is kind of the opposite. It's more like highlighting a specific word. Remember that the DNA is wrapped around those histones, kind of like thread around a spool. When that DNA is tightly wrapped, it's harder for the cell to read or use those genes. Histone acetylation helps with loosening that thread. Small chemical tags called acetyl groups are added to the histones, which makes the DNA wrap more loosely, so the cell's machinery can access those genes easily and turn them on. So that's histone acetylation. Now I'll talk about one more major mechanism of epigenetics, and that's non-coding RNAs. Going back to the central dogma, remember that mRNA is translated into proteins. However, there's actually a lot of different kinds of RNA. In fact, ribosomal RNA, also called rRNA, is a crucial component of the ribosome, the cellular structure that's responsible for making those proteins. There's also tRNA, or transfer RNA. Those play a role in translation. They're responsible for bringing the correct amino acid to the ribosome. Now, those are just the types of RNA that are important to translation, or the process of building a protein. Non-coding RNAs are RNA molecules that don't code for proteins, as the name suggests. There's a few different kinds. One kind are microRNAs, and those kind of act like off switches. They find a specific mRNA, which is the kind that's translated in a protein, and they stick to them, blocking or destroying them so that a protein doesn't get made. Another kind are long non-coding RNAs, and those are kind of like organizers or facilitators. They attract other molecules to silence or activate certain genes. They guide enzymes to the right part of DNA, and they distract other molecules, keeping them from doing stuff. Small interfering RNAs are similar to microRNAs, except they're more precise. They target very specific messages and cut them up. In plants and some animals, they can also mark DNA to stay shut off long term. Finally, there's piRNAs, and they're generally most active in sperm and egg cells. Their job is to silence transposons. Those are basically DNA sequences that can move around from one location to another within the genome. The piRNAs help lock down the ones that can mess things up if they move around. So those are non-coding RNAs, just another way that your body changes how its DNA is used. So we've talked a lot about the different major mechanisms of epigenetics. Let's zoom out a bit. There are countless ways that epigenetics impacts us, and some of these forces can even begin to affect us before we're even born. For example, the diet that your mother ate while pregnant with you can affect your metabolism for the rest of your life. Chronic stress can lead to changes in your brain chemistry by affecting genes involved in emotional regulation. Even trauma can leave these molecular marks that affect future generations. This can be seen where famine experienced by large populations may have left a lasting impact on the health of later generations, leaving current individuals to be more likely to suffer from conditions like diabetes or obesity. But epigenetics isn't just about damage or trauma. It's also about growth and resilience. It's your body responding to the world around you, for better or worse. Let's look at the better. Exercise doesn't just build muscle, it activates genes that improve brain health, memory, and your ability to handle stress. Healthy eating can lead to epigenetic changes that support a good metabolism and immune strength. Sleep isn't just rest, it's repair. Good sleep hygiene helps regulate genes involved in aging, brain function, and emotional balance. Supportive relationships, whether it's friends, family, community, can buffer the effects of stress and literally protect your DNA by maintaining the integrity of your epigenetic marks. Creative expression and learning new skills can also maintain your brain's health, strengthening neural connections and resilience to mental illness. So yes, your environment can hurt you, but it can also help you heal. A benefit of epigenetics is that you're not stuck with the same settings forever. You can change the way your body reads your DNA simply by the way you live. And that brings me to what I've been talking about throughout this video, a moment in our lives that these changes happened within us. Looking back on the pandemic, I can't help but think about how it kind of transformed me, rewired me into the person I am today. I'm sure there was no shortage of epigenetic changes that occurred in me. One way I think back about how the pandemic affected me is with respect to my bedroom, the most sacred physical place in my life. I now spent even more time there. Suddenly, school wasn't a place that I went. It was a screen I stared at, from the same exact desk that I ate at and talked to my friends from. I found myself struggling not just to learn, but to stay engaged and enthused about my education. The sudden lack of a schedule and structure in my life also made it easier for my days to blur together in a haze of missed deadlines and disconnected lectures. However, I believe the isolation encouraged and, in a way, forced me to actually understand who I am and how I want to operate. That's what made me jump into and embrace those late-night conversations and early morning walks. With nothing but time and uncertainty, I also started to take ownership of my learning in a way I hadn't before, albeit still an ongoing process. I built my own study systems, obsessively reviewed videos of material I personally found interesting, and really tried to understand things rather than memorize. The pandemic stripped away structure, but in that void I was allowed to make my own. It was through that process, frustrating, lonely, and unglamorous, that I became sure of my passions. Not because someone told me I should be, but because in the most uncertain of times, I found myself repeatedly taking solace in them. In a way, I believe the pandemic gave me space to find that clarity. So those are some ways that you can literally change your genes, along with some personal reflections that I hope were interesting. I hope in this video I was able to share that not only is your genetic makeup a product of your parents' genes, but your environment and habits have also played a role in shaping you into who you are. You genuinely are one of a kind. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.